Hi, you're listening to Engagement Drivers, presented by EveryoneSocial. Each week, we'll share actionable tips, strategies, and success stories that you and your teams can use to steer your brand, social, and employee engagement in the right direction.
Hey everybody, Todd here, Director of Marketing at EveryoneSocial, bringing you another edition of Engagement Drivers, and very excited about this week as we have Ashley Faus, the Content Strategy Lead of Software Teams at Atlassian. And as promised from the previous week, we were going to start introducing some new interviews and some awesome guests, whether they are customers of ours or just great thought leaders in the space. So we're getting excited and we're really pumped to dive into this conversation today. Let's get to it.
Today, we're going to be talking about how to create authentic content for your personal brand. And it's been one of those topics that I think more and more people are talking about. We're seeing it on social media. You're seeing more leaders, more company leaders, leadership, all conveying the interest and why they want to do these things. So very excited to dive into this. And it's something that's near and dear to the EveryoneSocial team's heart. So Ashley, thank you so much for being here. Before we get into it, would love to learn a little bit about your work at Atlassian and kind of your background with content and social media.
Sure. Yeah, super excited to talk about this. It's definitely a hot topic, and I think there's a lot of misconceptions around it. So excited to hopefully dispel some myths as we get into this conversation today. So I'm Ashley. I'm a marketer, writer, and speaker by day, and a singer, actor, and fitness fiend by night. So I'm currently working on content, all things content at Atlassian across our Agile and DevOps topics. So really focused on marketing to a developer audience. And I have been in a number of startups and other companies prior to joining Atlassian. So obviously in startups, you have to touch all areas of marketing. And so I started to realize that there's a lot of overlaps between thought leadership, content strategy, and social media. And so that's how I've ended up in my current role doing a mix of long form, short form, written, audio, visual content, and then distributing that across a variety of channels, including email, social media, community. Big remit for Agile and DevOps topics.
Love it. Yeah, that's a big content background and lots to do for sure. There's no ending when it comes to content and social media. So yeah, let's get into it. I think personal branding, employee personal brands, all this stuff. I mean, I think if you've been on social media in the last year and a half, you can't get away from these things. So it's one of those kind of must for professionals these days, and more so for companies now to start to nurture those employer brands. So what do you think about this, and kind of where do you see the value of social personal branding going in this next year, maybe even beyond, maybe a couple of years down the road?
Yeah, so I think that it's going to continue to grow. I think more and more employers are starting to realize the value of what's traditionally called employee advocacy or employee amplification. And because employers are starting to kind of push this and they're like, hey, we need our people to be on social and talking about us. A lot of employees are saying, okay, but I don't want to just tell your story, company. Like, I want to tell my own story. And so I think there's been thus far a little bit of tension between those two things where employers either 100% want to control that and employees say no, or employees are kind of going rogue and doing their own thing. And now employers are saying, oh, wait, we want to tap into that. You've built a really great network, or you've started telling these really great stories. So I think we're going to see a lot more negotiation on that and a lot more clarity where it's a cooperation between basically companies and brands and individuals instead of it being kind of this dichotomy like it is now. I think it's grown a lot too. If you look at the Edelman Trust Barometer, for example, so they've been putting out this report over the last decade or so, and trust has steadily been declining over the last decade, particularly for formal authorities. So people don't really trust the government. They don't really trust, institutions or religious leaders. There's all of these traditional markers of credibility and authority. People are starting to lose their trust in them. But where they maintain their trust, or where trust has grown, is among their peers, people like themselves or technical experts who are just a couple steps ahead of them. And so because of that shift in who we trust and why we trust them, that's where you're starting to see the rise of these employee brands or personal brands or individual influencers, whatever words you want to use to describe these people.
That's great. Yeah. And it's one of the things too, we're we're excited that more people are understanding it, because I think, if anyone who is familiar with either EveryoneSocial or employee advocacy programs, it's like we've been talking about this for a decade now. And it's funny how social media in the workplace used to be really, really frowned upon, right? Or you could get in trouble for it. And now it's kind of like, wait, we actually, this makes sense. We should be doing more of this. And kind of to your point too, is there's that balance where you have to show the employee why it matters and the benefits they're getting out of it. Too often these companies are focused on, well, we just want it for our purposes. And of course, people don't want to be walking billboards just for their company. They want to actually engage, create things that are of value and of interest to them. So it's something that we're trying to really push forward to with the industry in general, is get everyone to understand that there's more to it than just promoting your company content. It's a whole mix of things. So the challenge with personal branding is that you need content, which you are for sure familiar with, and working in the content kind of space. And I think a lot of people get intimidated by that. How have you built your own kind of content and social strategy to not only kind of empower your own professional career, but even that of Atlassian? Because I think, you and I have been connected for a little bit now, and I've seen you really start to post and really be part of the community. So, I'd be really interested kind of how you start to build your own kind of strategy for this.
Sure. So one of the big things that I like to start with is, what are some questions that I've answered and what are some questions that I've asked? So most professionals, whether you're in marketing, whether you're in technology, whether you're a doctor, whatever the thing is that you're doing, people come to you for your expertise. So what's the question that you get asked all the time? And I call it my 3-strike rule, that if I answer a question 3 times, it probably means that I need to sit down and either record a longer video or write a longer piece of content about it, because people think that I know about it. So I'm like, okay, somebody asked me this question 3 times, time to make a bigger piece of content about it. So that's the first thing. The second thing, if you feel like you're new in your career, you don't feel as skilled, or you're trying to break into a new area, is what are the questions that I'm asking? What can I learn today? So again, you're seeking out expertise from your colleagues, from your friends, from your manager. What questions are you asking them? So that's the first way to kind of start gathering the content, is what are the questions that I answer frequently and what are the questions that I'm currently asking? Once you get those kind of put down on paper, set up in a video, recorded as a voice note to yourself, now you have this repository of assets and you can start sharing. And so I think people think that in order to start sharing content, it has to be perfectly polished, it has to be perfectly rational, it all has to go together, it has to be perfect. And that's not true. The nice thing about sharing on social media is you get a new chance. I think I read somewhere a couple of years ago, the half-life of a tweet is 8 minutes. So every 8 minutes, if you're on Twitter, you get a new chance to try to formulate your thoughts or to share content, right? It's a little bit longer than that on LinkedIn, but basically getting out of this habit of thinking that everything has to be perfectly figured out and formulated, you can really start to learn in public. If you're on the company side of that, once you start getting a lot of these assets, you start to kind of see the topics that you're passionate about and the expertise that you have. And then you can start to map that into the company strategy. And so I like to do this at what I call content depths. So conceptual, strategic, and tactical. So at the conceptual depth, this is the what and the why of the idea, and it helps people think about the problem space. At the strategic level, this is the processes, the tools, and the key knowledge components that must be in place to make that conceptual idea a reality. And it helps people frame up and think about the solution space. And then the tactical, this is the nitty gritty. It's super prescriptive. It's, how do we actually get these things done? Once we've got our solutions to map to our problems, what do we need to do to make this stuff reality? And so once you start to look at all of these raw assets that you have, you can then start to map them into these content depths and say, okay, let me talk about this from a big idea standpoint. Let me talk about this from a strategic standpoint and a process standpoint. And then you can map that all the way down to, okay, here's your 5 prompts to answer. So if we were to take this conversation, right, at the conceptual level, why does employee branding matter? Why do people want to become influencers? Why do you want to build a personal brand? Well, it's because trust is declining. There's your conceptual. Strategic. Okay, what do we need to do? Well, these content depths are a strategy for you to be able to do that. And then at the tactical level, name 1 question you asked, name 1 question you answered. There's 2 tactics for you to get started. Those are immediately actionable things that you can do to start putting content depths into reality so that you can start to build trust to build your own personal brand.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think that's super helpful. And I can definitely see how that would work together. And I like the part too where you said it doesn't have to be perfect. That's, I think, one of the things we've always kind of been trying to say too is people are looking for that human element, right? That personalization that, hey, you're not going to be always the perfect writer or have everything designed perfectly. It's like, it's about the information and the content that you're sharing and the context of it, which we always seem to get value from too. So I really like that you're thinking about, don't worry about being perfect, just put yourself out there kind of thing, you know?
Well, and it's funny because when you're not perfect and somebody corrects you or someone says, oh, I'm also struggling with that. And then someone else says, oh, I actually am really good at this. Here's what I've learned. Or somebody, says, here's a resource for you to get more knowledge about whatever thing you're struggling with. When you're not perfect in that way, it gives you that much more content to be able to riff on. So I had this the other day, somebody, I put a piece of content out there and I was like, here's the 4 tips. And I was basically talking about how to normalize asking dumb questions. And somebody in the comments actually called me out and was like, hey, I have a dumb question. What do these terms mean in your post? And I was like, man, I didn't even follow my own advice effectively. And so then I was like, this might have to be another post about normalizing, calling people out to hold them accountable. And what's the right way to do that? So now I have, 3 posts that just off that one comment that I need to write about, leadership and being vulnerable and authenticity and accountability. There's so much you can say there just off of that one interaction where actually I kind of made a mistake and somebody kindly said, hey, I'm a little confused about this. Can you clarify?
That's amazing too. And it also starts that conversation where people start to remember that you are open to conversations or giving feedback or responding back to learning from that too. And that's always about being social. And that's part of it, which I think is kind of key. So what do you recommend an individual looking to get started do, especially if they might not have, full company support yet? Maybe they don't have, an advocacy solution yet, which is totally fine too. We can all do this kind of manual stuff. But, what are the tips to kind of get started if they don't really have that support system in place yet?
Honestly, just start. Just put yourself out there. Pick one platform. I'm highly biased to suggest LinkedIn. I think it's an excellent place for people who are in B2B, no matter what their skill set is or their discipline is. Just get started. You'll start to find your people. One area where I talk about this is to pick an area where you have a lot of knowledge and that you're super passionate about it. What's the thing that you nerd out about? What's the thing that at parties, if you find somebody else who knows about that thing, you're like, oh my gosh, you're my person. And you sit there and talk for 3 hours. How did you become passionate about that? Who are your favorite authors that talk about that topic? Where do you stay on trend? Like, how do you learn about what's happening with that topic? So I'll give an example. From a non-professional standpoint, I really enjoy musical theater and bodybuilder style workouts. And so I follow a number of different influencers on social media, particularly on Instagram. I perform in musicals. I can nerd out about musicals. What does that have to do with marketing? Well, one of the ways that I develop really high customer empathy is that I'm constantly trying on new personas every time I perform in a musical. I have to figure out, who is this person? What do they care about? What are they doing in this scene? How do they walk? How do they talk? What do they like? What do they dislike? All of that translates into marketing. And so for me, I could potentially put together a nice little story about how I started out as a musical theater major. I still have time to perform. How does that happen? Well, I work for a company that values work-life balance and encourages my creativity outside. So there's a company-related post. And I can talk about customer empathy, which I think is key for marketers because of how I try on these different characters. And then I can do the same thing. My go-to example for the content depths is around fitness. And so I've married those things that I'm passionate about in my personal life with some tie-ins into my professional life. So I would say no matter who you are, what your profession is, what are you passionate about? How did you get passionate about that? And how do you stay on topic? What resources do you use to learn? Start sharing those things, and that'll start to give you content. Now, once you start to build that following, obviously your company is going to start to see, hey, wait a minute, you're tagging us. You're talking about these things. You're going to start to meet other coworkers in the same space. I've had colleagues ping me and be like, I didn't know you like bodybuilding. I love bodybuilding too. How are you doing on, your weightlifting or whatever the thing is? So you'll start to find your people both internally who are, current employees at your company and externally who are in the community so that you can start to grow those conversations, which leads to more content, which then leads to more connections so that you start to grow organically.
Yeah, I love that. And just start is one of my kind of favorite like little mantras. As cliche as it might be, it's so true. Is just get started with things. There's so many times I can relate to things. If I didn't just start, I wouldn't have had certain opportunities or wouldn't have experienced something that, could have changed the direction of my career in a positive way. So yeah, I think there's this fear sometimes, or that, the imposter syndrome, where they feel like they don't have something to share or that it's not worth it, but it is. Everyone has something unique to really share or put out into the world. And I think from the company standpoint, it's interesting because we see these ones who are, it's like, it has to be company content. Like, well, hold on, like the personal stuff can still impact your company. And your example was perfect too, how you kind of tied it back to Atlassian. But even so, if it's personal stuff that just starts to take off, people see where you work on your profile, right? They start to kind of associate your name with that. They might look into your, company from that point. They might see your banner image or your description of where you work. I mean, this is still impacting the company too, whether people realize it or not. And that's why we kind of, don't like when certain companies are afraid to let their personalities of their employees come out, because they're saying this content can still really impact your brand and the culture, right? The culture of employee engagement and getting people to actually care about where they work and what they do. And it sounds like Atlassian has a really great culture and really supportive of what you're doing, which is fantastic. So one thing we do love to see is that more companies are now embracing this employee personal branding and really encouraging it. And obviously there's a benefit to not only the individual, but the company too. So how can organizations kind of start to ensure more of their people are sharing, creating, or at least engaging with content?
I think first, give explicit permission to share. So to your point, however long ago it's been, I know early in my career, there was definitely a stigma around like, oh, you do the tweets, you do the twits. I'm like, no, it's not the twits. Like this is, anytime I was on my phone, they're like, are you doing the twits? I'm like, no, right? So there was a huge misconception around social media, and it was seen as this time suck. And these days, there's still some of that stigma. And so I think for companies who give people explicit permission to share, and it sounds counterintuitive, but having guidelines around what people can share. So especially for people who are not in marketing or communications or sales, they may not know exactly where the line is on what you can and can't say. And so as employees, you have, access to proprietary information or things like that the company may not want shared with the world, because that might impact strategy and competition and those types of things. And so if you're not really versed in how and what to say, having guidelines is super helpful. So one thing that our company has started doing is saying this content is explicitly for employee use. Please don't share it. And then in other cases, labeling it and saying, hey, we'd love for you to share this content, and we've suggested some content below. So that's one way, is just give explicit permission and give some clear guidelines for your employees so that they feel confident in what they can and can't say from, kind of a legal perspective or a competition perspective. Second, have leadership start to share and set the example. So when you start to see your senior leaders speaking, talking, writing, putting their name on things and sharing their story, you start to see employees saying, okay, I can do that too. And now I start to see how that authenticity comes to life when you start talking about sharing different, personal versus professional stories. And then finally, I'd say reward the employees who share. So I've had employees come in and say like, hey, actually, I saw this thing you posted on LinkedIn and I really liked it. I shared it with my team. That makes me feel really good. And it encourages me to keep sharing. It doesn't matter that this thing was or was not explicitly tied to a revenue goal or a lead gen goal or a hiring goal. My teammates saw it. They thought it was valuable. They shared it with their colleagues. That's great. Thank you for doing that. So we frequently see this. We'll give kudos to people. I also encourage employees to include this in their performance reviews in terms of additional impact. So show when you post company level content, whether that's a press release, whether that's an interview with an executive, whether that's a feature release, whether that's a job description. When you post that, pull those metrics and include that in your performance review. In our case, we have kind of an additional wins or impact section that talks about how you're sharing beyond your role or beyond your team. So those are the three things: give explicit permission, have leadership set the example, and then reward employees who are sharing.
Yeah, those are all great points. I like the additional in the performance review, kind of the impact and screenshots, because I've seen a few, even just additional people I follow on LinkedIn who have like shared screenshots of emails that their sales team has got and said, hey, because of, this employee, we saw your content, we decided to look into your company, we really want to see it, and then end up being a closed deal, which is kind of cool because it's good for their career, and it shows that there's impact across the board, whether it's about the company all the time or not, that there is influence across not only employees but the company. So it's really cool to kind of see those things. So I really like that idea of the performance reviews and the social impact there.
Yeah, that's great. And it's awesome too if other teammates are willing to screenshot that and be like, hey, so-and-so said they saw you on LinkedIn and now they've come to me to ask a question, right? It's like making those connections. It's hard to do in traditional attribution software or, recruiting or whatever your pipeline is for these things. It's hard to measure those exact touches, but you hear the stories anecdotally. And so any way you can capture that to start translating that into data so that you can show that value, it's great.
Yeah, it's so hard to keep track of certain things today too, especially just with everything changing of where people are interacting and how they're finding things. So yeah, it's really cool when we see that. We get notes too sometimes. We're like, it's good to know that the things we're doing are working or the things that employees are sharing are having some kind of impact. So yeah, I love hearing those kind of stories and seeing that Atlassian is doing that as well. So what mistakes have you seen companies make, when they're looking to kind of activate these employee personal brands? I feel like we touched a little bit on it, but we'd be curious to kind of see or hear what you think, the mistakes that people kind of come into this when they're like, okay, we're excited about personal brands. We see all these employees doing it elsewhere. Like we need to capture this and start doing it. And often sometimes they jump the gun too quickly. It doesn't work. And then they kind of move on from it. So we'd love to hear kind of what you see in mistakes that are out there that companies are making.
Yeah, I think the first one is canned posts. So basically brands and companies, it's easier to say than employees and employers. That one letter makes a huge difference. So I'm going to call it brands and companies. When brands and companies write out a very crafted, wordsmithed, perfect, tweet or LinkedIn post that's very clearly written by comms or marketing or sales or whoever it is, right? And you can always kind of tell because nobody talks like that. Nobody talks like that, right? Like today, I am thrilled to announce that I have done this thing and therefore the impact to you. It's like you hear it in that voice, this stilted voice. So I think that's the first thing. And I get it, especially for people who are not in the habit of writing. Staring at the blank screen is terrifying. It mocks you, right? The little cursor blinks at you and it mocks you. So I understand the urge to give starter copy. Where I struggle is when employers say, or brands say, here's the copy you must use. Okay, no, I don't speak like that. Nobody speaks like that. This looks weird. I'm not going to use that copy. So that's the first thing is canned posts. The second thing, which is closely related, is forcing employees to only share company content. If you're going to be on LinkedIn, the only thing you can share is links to our blog. Okay, y'all, no. Come on, right? Again, that makes no sense. I market to developers, and that's great. Love the developer audience. We have some really excellent solutions for developers. My personal network is not made up of developers. It's primarily made up of marketers. So if the only thing I share about is DevOps metrics, nobody's going to follow me because they're like, who are you? Why are you talking about DevOps metrics, right? My network doesn't care about the DevOps metrics. So that's not what I share. So that's the second thing is forcing employees to only share company content. And then the third thing is a blitz. So everybody, and you see this, if you look on LinkedIn right now, everybody and their mother is promoting, we're hiring, we're hiring, we're hiring. And literally that's all the posts say. We're hiring, we're hiring, we're hiring. Okay, we get it. Everyone is hiring. Thank you. Like we get it. Hiring is hard. I don't really know why I'm going to work for you when there's 100 other generic we're hiring messages in my feed. And so employers get people to basically blitz instead of doing a consistent program to build that trust and build that authenticity. Again, they run it as a campaign, not as a personal brand, not as a relationship building platform, not as a community. So those are the three things: canned posts of like, here's the copy, and everyone just copies it, forcing people to only post company content, and then a blitz versus a consistent, authentic program of sharing where it's empowering your employees and it's helping them build their influence, their network, and their personal brands. And then finding the intersection of where that makes sense with the company story, right? People should not be co-opting the company story as their own thing, but companies should not be co-opting personal brands as their own thing. They need to be working together.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love all that. And it's funny too, you bring up the company link stuff because we've been telling more people to knock that off or try to mix up what they're sharing or encouraging employees to share. You know, company content's of course important in there, but there's so many different formats and different ways to bring it in there to make it interesting and unique. So it's not all just, like you said, kind of, hey, I'm a marketer. I don't have dev people. If I'm sharing dev stuff, like they're not going to, it's a disconnect. So I totally agree with this. I really love the direction you went with that. And I think that will definitely resonate with people who are listening to this. And I think more companies who are looking to kind of get into this whole, utilizing employee networks more for the good of the company and for the employee. Well, thank you, Ashley, so much for this conversation. I really enjoyed it. I think you have really good insights. I'm excited to keep watching your personal brand grow and your conversations online. Is there anything else that you wanted to share about this kind of topic? And then how can everyone get in touch with you?
Yeah, it was great talking to you too, Todd. I think it's really awesome what you guys are doing to bring more awareness to this topic. So super fun to talk. I don't think I have other things to share in terms of getting in touch with me. I've shared numerous times. I'm on LinkedIn. That's where I tend to connect. That's where I tend to have conversations in threads. And that's where I share a lot about topics and frameworks and social media and content strategy as well. So I'd love to connect with folks. And if they have more questions, I'd love to see them in the comments.
Thanks for listening. We'll be back next week with more engagement insights. Want to know how EveryoneSocial can provide you with the tools needed to keep everyone at your company connected, informed, creating, and sharing? Visit EveryoneSocial.com to learn more.